The kingdom of Lumeria stretched across rolling hills and shimmering rivers, its towers reaching high enough to touch the clouds. Golden banners fluttered in the wind, and the streets of the capital were filled with merchants, nobles, and travelers from distant lands. From above, the city looked like a perfect jewel, but inside the castle, behind the walls of polished stone, a different world existed, a quiet, lonely world that belonged to Princess Elira. Elira had been born blind. The first time she opened her eyes, there had been only darkness. At first, the courtiers had whispered among themselves, unsure what to do with a princess who could not see. The king, busy with diplomacy and state matters, had nodded politely at reports of her condition, but then returned to his affairs, leaving Elira to be cared for by servants and her loyal guide, an old caretaker named Marin. Marin was the only one who treated her not as a child who needed pity, but as a person capable of learning and understanding the world in her own way. The palace was full of people, but Elira had learned that most of them did not notice her at all. The nobles hurried past her chambers without a glance, their faces tight with concern for rank and reputation rather than curiosity about her mind or spirit. Guards whispered in the halls, remarking on her delicate hands or the way she moved slowly through the corridors, always guided by Marin's steady presence. To them, Elira was fragile, almost invisible, a shadow in a world that celebrated sight and status. Yet Elira had learned to navigate the castle with remarkable skill. She memorized the patterns of footsteps, the subtle changes in temperature as the sun moved across the towers, the faint echoes that told her where the halls curved or where doors opened. She could identify people by their voices, their scent, or the way their presence shifted the air around her. In this way, she saw more than most of the courtiers who passed her by, their eyes full of arrogance and indifference. Despite her isolation, Elira was not lonely in the way people assumed. She had her books, full of stories and knowledge, and Marin, who had become a friend and mentor. Marin taught her not only how to move safely through the castle, but also how to think, how to reason, and how to question the world. "The world may not notice you, princess," Marin often said, "but you notice it. And noticing is the first step toward changing it." She loved the way the marble floors were cool beneath her feet, how the tapestries whispered when the wind brushed against them, and how the sunlight felt warm on her face when she sat by the highest balcony. The world was full of beauty, and she could sense more than most could see. Everything in her routine changed the day Kale arrived. He was a human, tall and strong, with skin tanned from the sun of another world and eyes that seemed to take in everything with curiosity. Humans were rare in Lumeria. Travelers came and went, but few stayed long, and none had ever treated Elira with anything but pity or avoidance. But Kale was different. When he met her, he did not flinch, he did not avert his gaze, and he did not speak to her as if she were fragile. Instead, he smiled warmly and extended his hand. "I am Kale," he said simply, "and I am glad to meet you." For the first time in her life, someone had chosen to see her, not just her blindness or her royal title, but the person she truly was. "I am Elira," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet strength she had cultivated in the solitude of her chambers. From that moment, Kale began to change her life. Unlike the nobles who treated her presence as inconvenient, he asked questions, listened to her answers, and engaged her in conversation. He wanted to know how she experienced the world, what she learned from her senses, and what thoughts she had about the kingdom and its people. Elira found herself speaking freely, explaining how she memorized the halls, how she noticed small details in the court, and how she understood people better by listening to them than by watching their expressions. The court, of course, noticed this unusual interaction. Whispers began immediately. "Why does a human spend so much time with the princess?" some asked. "Does he not see that she is blind and weak?" others murmured. Elira ignored the gossip. She had spent years learning to block out the petty judgments of others. Kale's presence was like sunlight in a room long closed off. It reminded her of possibilities she had never dared imagine. Kale, in turn, was fascinated by Elira's abilities. He had traveled to many worlds and seen countless people, but he had never met someone who experienced reality so differently yet so completely. He admired her intelligence, her creativity, and her courage. "You notice what others ignore," he said one day, "and that makes you stronger than most people who can see." Elira smiled, realizing that she had always known this, but no one else had ever said it aloud. As days passed, Kale and Elira explored the castle together. He described the gardens in vivid detail, the colors of the flowers, the way the leaves swayed in the breeze, and the scent of the morning dew. Elira described to him the sounds she noticed, the way the river gurgled over rocks, the rustle of animals hidden in the forest, the distant hum of the city waking up. They shared stories of their worlds, and in those conversations, Elira discovered a new sense of freedom. Here, she was not ignored. Here, she was seen, respected, and valued. But life in the castle was not without tension. Many nobles viewed Kale's attention as improper. Some avoided Elira entirely, refusing to meet her gaze or hear her words. The king himself was polite but distant, absorbed in matters of politics and trade. Elira had learned not to depend on him for recognition. Yet Kale's respect made her realize that even a princess, born into privilege, could be overlooked if the world judged her only by appearances. One evening, Kale took Elira to the highest balcony of the castle. The wind was cool, carrying the scents of the forest and the distant sea. "Do you ever wonder what it's like to see the world?" he asked. Elira smiled, closing her eyes to feel the wind on her face. "I see it in my own way," she said. "The world has patterns, sounds, and rhythms. I know it better than most who walk by and never notice." Kale nodded, impressed. "And that is why I came to stand by you," he said. "Because the world needs people who notice, who act, who see beyond what is easy to see." Elira felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of possibility she had never felt before. Perhaps the world was not so blind after all, or perhaps it only needed the right person to show the way. In the following weeks, Kale encouraged Elira to participate more in the court. He asked her opinion on matters of trade, strategy, and diplomacy, guiding the nobles to listen to her. At first, many resisted, seeing it as a disruption to their routines. But as Elira spoke, her intelligence and intuition became undeniable. She predicted outcomes of negotiations, offered solutions to disputes, and suggested improvements to the kingdom's defenses. Every time she spoke, Kale stood beside her, not as a protector, but as an equal, signaling to everyone that her words deserved attention. Elira's world began to expand beyond the castle walls. She imagined exploring forests, rivers, and distant cities. She dreamed of meeting other people who might not see in the same way she did, but who had strengths of their own. Kale spoke of his own travels, of planets where humans faced impossible odds, and yet overcame them through courage and ingenuity. Elira listened, fascinated, realizing that the universe was far larger and more complex than the castle had ever shown her. Despite the newfound attention, Elira remained humble. She knew that she was still young, that she still had much to learn, and that her strength came not only from herself but from those who believed in her. Kale's respect reminded her that one person could make a difference in the world, and that standing beside someone, even silently, could empower them in ways no one else could. By the end of the first month, the princess who had been ignored was no longer invisible. She walked the halls with confidence, spoke with authority, and laughed freely, a sound that had rarely been heard in the quiet corners of the castle. And through it all, Kale remained beside her, a reminder that humanity, even in a single visitor from another world, could inspire courage, unlock potential, and awaken hope where it had long been dormant. The kingdom of Lumeria, with all its beauty and grandeur, had remained blind to Elira for too long. But with Kale's arrival, she had discovered something more important than sight: the power of being seen, of being understood, and of standing beside someone who believed in her. And in that quiet, growing light, Elira began to imagine a future where she would no longer be ignored, where her voice would matter, and where courage, empathy, and intelligence could reshape not only her life but the destiny of her kingdom. Days passed in the castle of Lumeria, yet for Elira, every day felt brighter with Kale beside her. He moved through the halls with ease, speaking to nobles, guards, and servants alike, yet he always returned to her side. To Elira, it felt as though a new world had opened, a world where her thoughts, her senses, and her voice mattered. She no longer wandered the corridors alone. She no longer felt invisible. Kale was unlike anyone Elira had ever met. He did not judge her for being blind, nor did he treat her as delicate or fragile. Instead, he treated her as an equal, asking her questions about the castle, about the kingdom, and even about the people who worked there. "How do you know which doors lead where?" he asked one morning as they moved through the echoing hallways. Elira smiled, her fingers brushing the edges of the stone walls. "I listen," she said. "The echoes tell me. The floors feel different, the air moves differently. I can tell where the stairs are, where the halls curve, even where people are standing, just by listening. Sight can show many things, but it cannot show everything. I feel the world differently, but I understand it fully. Does he not see that she is incapable of understanding the court? Another laughed quietly, saying, Soon he will believe her the true ruler of this kingdom. Elira did not hear their whispers. She only heard Cale's voice, steady and warm, guiding her, challenging her to think, to question, and to act. Cale shared stories of his own world, tales of courage and invention, of humans who had faced impossible challenges and overcome them with wit and bravery. He spoke of civilizations where the weak were not ignored but trained, where differences were celebrated as strengths rather than scorned as weaknesses. Elira listened intently. She had never considered the idea that someone could see potential where others only saw limitation. For the first time, she felt that her blindness was not a barrier, but a unique way to understand the world. One afternoon, Cale led Elira to the castle library, a vast chamber filled with shelves of books that stretched to the ceiling. Elira loved the smell of parchment and ink, the quiet rustle of pages, the faint hum of history stored within those walls. Cale guided her fingers over the spines of books, describing their titles, their colors, and the ideas within. He read aloud from the texts, and Elira absorbed every word, asking questions and offering insights that surprised even him. You understand strategy better than most generals I have met, he said, smiling. Elira blushed slightly, unused to praise but not uncomfortable with it. I have learned by listening, she replied. I notice things others do not. They had dismissed her for so long, assuming she was incapable, that her growing confidence and insight unsettled them. Elira, however, did not gloat. She continued to move quietly through the halls, always observing, always thinking. But she was no longer the ignored princess. She was someone whose voice carried weight, someone whose mind held value. The first true test of this new partnership came unexpectedly. One morning, the palace erupted with alarm. Scouts reported unusual movements along the eastern border, shapes and shadows that suggested an army, though no one could be certain. The king summoned his generals and advisors. We must protect the kingdom, he said, his voice firm, though his eyes betrayed concern. The nobles argued among themselves, debating strategies and pointing fingers. Some proposed waiting, others demanded immediate attack. Confusion spread and fear rippled through the castle like a silent tide. Cale listened, observing the chaos. He turned to Elira. Can you help me understand? He asked quietly. Elira nodded, sensing the tension and movement in the air. She had trained herself to notice patterns and shifts that others overlooked. Listening carefully, she discerned the sounds of distant footsteps, the subtle vibrations through the earth, the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. They are moving in small groups, she said. Not the main army, but scouts and skirmishers. They will try to probe the defenses first. And I see what others miss. Slowly, the generals began to pay attention to Elira's words, asking questions, seeking clarifications. She spoke with calm certainty, guiding them through observations and possibilities. By the end of the session, a preliminary strategy had formed, one that considered the intelligence she had gathered from sound, movement, and intuition. That evening, Cale and Elira walked along the palace ramparts, the cool wind brushing their faces. Elira felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. For years, she had longed to participate in the affairs of her kingdom, to be heard, to matter. Now she was on the verge of doing so, with Cale beside her. Do you think I am ready? She asked quietly. Cale smiled. You have always been ready, he said. You just needed someone to stand with you. Elira contributed further, suggesting ways to use the terrain to their advantage, how to anticipate enemy movement, and where reinforcements might be most effective. The castle, once a place of quiet and isolation for her, had become a hub of planning, with Elira's voice at its center. Meanwhile, Cale continued to teach her about humanity, about resilience, courage, and ingenuity. He spoke of moments in his travels when people faced impossible odds and triumphed, not because they were strongest, but because they were clever, brave, and willing to take risks. Elira absorbed every story, seeing parallels in her own life. She had lived in a world where people assumed her incapable, yet she had found ways to thrive, to learn, and to understand more than many who could see. Cale's lessons gave her a new perspective. That being seen and trusted by someone else could amplify her abilities beyond what she had imagined. As the first signs of conflict appeared on the horizon, Elira felt a surge of determination. For the first time, she realized that her blindness was not a limitation, but a different way of experiencing reality. She had senses honed by years of careful observation, a mind trained to notice patterns, and the courage to act despite fear. And now, with Kale beside her, she felt a new strength, one born of partnership, trust, and shared purpose. The court slowly began to accept her. Some nobles, previously skeptical, started seeking her opinion on minor matters. They could not ignore her insight, nor the way Kale's confidence in her lent her words authority. Even the king, who had been polite but distant, began to listen more attentively, curious about the reports she had helped compile. Elira's presence, once a shadow in the halls, was now a force to be reckoned with, subtle but undeniable. One night, as the kingdom prepared for the approaching threat, Elira and Kale stood in the castle gardens. The moonlight shimmered on the leaves, and the air carried the scent of jasmine and pine. "Do you think we can really make a difference?" Elira asked softly. Kale placed a hand over hers. "We already are," he said. "You have already changed how people see you. That is the first step. The rest is just action." Kale had chosen to stand beside her, and in doing so had given her something more powerful than any sword or shield: trust, respect, and belief. As the first dawn of potential conflict broke over Lumeria, Elira felt ready. The princess who had been invisible was no longer silent. She was no longer ignored. And with a human ally at her side, she knew that the coming days would test her in ways she had never imagined, but also in ways that could prove her true strength. For the first time in her life, Elira was not just surviving. She was preparing to shape her world. And in that quiet, electric moment, she realized something profound. Courage was not about being fearless. It was about standing up, even when the world doubted you, and having someone beside you who believed in what you could do. With Kale beside her, Elira felt unstoppable. The future, once shadowed by ignorance and neglect, now gleamed with possibility. The morning sun had barely risen when the alarm bells rang through the city of Lumeria. Their clang echoed off the tall stone walls, bouncing into every corridor, every chamber, and every courtyard of the palace. Elira awoke to the sound, her heart quickening as the vibrations traveled through the floor beneath her feet. Marin was already at her side, helping her rise. Outside, the city was in motion. Soldiers hurried to the gates, merchants closed their stalls, and the sound of boots on stone filled the air with tension. Kale arrived moments later, his usual calm demeanor steadying her nerves. "They are at the borders," he said, his voice low but firm. "Scouts report unusual movement, more than we expected. We must prepare." Elira nodded, focusing her mind. She had learned to read the world through sound, movement, and intuition. Every vibration, every whisper of air, every distant echo was information. She could sense what others could not. The council chamber filled quickly. Generals, advisors, and nobles gathered, their faces tense with worry. The king sat at the head of the table, his expression grave, his hands resting heavily on the carved wood before him. "What news do we have?" he demanded, his voice carrying authority, though his eyes revealed unease. Reports were delivered in rapid succession. Scouts spoke of strange troops moving in stealthy formations, avoiding main roads and testing the kingdom's defenses. The generals debated strategy, their voices overlapping, some advocating for immediate counterattacks, others urging caution. Confusion filled the room, a storm of indecision that left Elira uneasy. She could feel the uncertainty, the fear, the hesitation, and she knew that this indecision could cost lives. Kale placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your observations can guide us," he said quietly. Elira closed her eyes, letting the sounds and vibrations around her settle into patterns. She felt the rhythm of the city, the wind brushing against the towers, the distant hum of approaching footsteps. She listened not just with her ears, but with her whole being. Slowly, she began to speak, her voice calm and precise. "They are not the full army," she said. "They are scouts and skirmishers, testing our defenses. They move in groups of 3 to 5, spread across the hills and forests to the east. Their goal is to see where we are weakest, where the soldiers are few, and where the gates can be breached." "How can a child know what trained soldiers intend?" one asked, his voice edged with disbelief. Elira's chin lifted slightly. "I do not see them with my eyes," she said, "but I sense their patterns, I hear what others ignore, and I understand their intentions through the signals they leave behind. They are accurate and they will guide us." His words silenced the room. The generals looked at each other, some reluctantly nodding. The king's eyes met Elira's, and for the first time there was a spark of trust in them. Plans began to form under her guidance. Elira suggested using the hills and forests to their advantage, placing small units in hidden positions to intercept the scouts before they could report back. She advised on routes for rapid communication and recommended positions where archers could control the terrain. Kale translated her observations into clear commands for the generals. Slowly, the chaos of the council gave way to strategy. The next hours were filled with preparation. Soldiers drilled, archers took positions, and messengers ran to fortify distant outposts. Elira moved among them, guided by Marin and Kale, listening and observing. She felt the pulse of the city and the army, sensing the tension, the fear, and the resolve. She noticed things others missed: the uneven stones that slowed heavy carts, the gaps between sentries, the subtle rustle of leaves that could reveal hidden paths. Every detail mattered, and she absorbed it all. As the first enemy scouts approached, the tension became almost unbearable. Elira stood with Kale atop one of the western towers, listening to the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel and the occasional muffled command. "There," she said, pointing in the direction she sensed movement. "3 of them are moving along the ridge. The others are splitting into 2 groups, likely to test the eastern gate." Soldiers moved into position quietly, taking cover behind rocks and trees. Archers readied their bows, and lookouts climbed higher to watch the hills. The first clash was subtle but decisive. Elira had predicted the scouts' movements, and the defenders were ready. When the skirmishers reached the ridge, they were met with prepared forces, and their advance was halted before they could retreat to warn the main army. Word of Elira's guidance spread quickly among the soldiers. They began to see her not as a blind princess, but as a leader with insight beyond expectation. Even the most skeptical generals found themselves following her instructions, amazed at the precision of her predictions. Kale stayed at her side, supporting her, guiding communication, and reinforcing her authority without overshadowing her. Together, they were an unstoppable combination of intuition and action. As the day progressed, the skirmishes continued. The enemy scouts tested every approach, probing for weaknesses, but Elira anticipated each move. She suggested traps, ambush points, and decoy positions that led the scouts into controlled areas. Each victory, small though it was, boosted the morale of the soldiers. They began to trust the guidance of the princess who had once been ignored, and they felt hope in the face of an advancing enemy. During a brief moment of quiet, Kale spoke to Elira. "You have changed everything," he said softly. "The soldiers believe in you, the generals follow your plan, and the king, he is beginning to see what I have always known." Elira smiled, her heart swelling with pride but tempered with humility. "I do not seek glory," she said. "I only want to protect the kingdom and its people. That is my duty." She noticed patterns in their marching, signals in their banners, and even the timing of their commands. Each detail allowed her to predict their next steps with remarkable accuracy. Kale observed her closely, impressed by her ability to synthesize information quickly and act decisively. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly. Elira shook her head. "I am only doing what I have always done: listen, observe, and think. The difference is now someone believes in me." Kale smiled, recognizing the truth in her words. It was trust more than skill alone that had unlocked her full potential. As evening approached, the enemy finally retreated from the ridge, realizing that their probes had failed and that the defenders were far stronger than anticipated. Elira and Kale stood on the balcony of the castle, listening to the distant footsteps fade into the hills. The kingdom had survived the first wave, not by brute force, but by intelligence, strategy, and courage. Elira's guidance had made the difference. The council gathered once more, this time to debrief. Generals and advisors looked at Elira with a new respect. The king himself approached her, his expression softened by admiration. "You have done what I never expected," he said. "You have saved lives today, not through sight but through insight." "I am proud of you, Elira." She bowed her head slightly, acknowledging his words without arrogance. "I only acted as I could, Your Majesty," she said. "I could not have done it without Kale." She realized that true partnership was not about taking credit but about standing together, trusting each other, and allowing each other to shine. That night, Elira lay in her chamber, listening to the quiet of the castle. She thought of the day's events, the skirmishes, the soldiers' trust, the king's approval. For the first time, she felt that she truly belonged in the affairs of the kingdom. She had a voice that mattered, abilities that were recognized, and a human ally who believed in her. Her blindness, once seen as a weakness, was now a strength that allowed her to perceive what others could not. Marin entered quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have done well today," she said. "The kingdom will never see you the same way again." Elira smiled softly. "It is not me alone," she said. "Kale stood beside me, and together we made this possible. I hope the kingdom learns that everyone, no matter how overlooked, has value and strength. She knew that more challenges would come, but for now, the first test had been passed. She had proven to herself, to the kingdom, and to the human who had chosen to believe in her that courage, insight, and partnership could overcome fear and uncertainty. As she drifted to sleep, Elira thought of the lessons she had learned. That being noticed could change everything, that trust could amplify strength, and that even a princess once ignored could shape the destiny of a kingdom when someone chose to stand beside her. Tomorrow, the battle might grow fiercer, the enemy might be more cunning, but she would not face it alone. And with Kale by her side, Elira felt ready to face whatever the universe might throw at them. The sun rose pale and red over the eastern hills of Lumeria, painting the landscape in a tense, glowing light. Elira stood at the top of the castle's highest tower, her hand lightly resting on the stone railing, listening to the faint rumble of approaching troops. She could sense them long before anyone else could, the rhythm of their steps, the subtle vibrations in the earth, and the shifting wind carrying their presence. With Kale beside her, she felt ready to face what was coming. "Their numbers are greater than yesterday," she said softly, "but they are divided. They have scouts at the front, but the main army is following behind, spread thin." Kale nodded, adjusting his stance to shield her from the wind. "Then we must act before they regroup. Your strategy yesterday saved us once. Today, it must protect the kingdom fully." The king, seated on a temporary command dais near the castle gate, observed silently, weighing her guidance with the wisdom of years and the surprise of a daughter whose courage had surpassed expectation. Elira's mind worked swiftly. She imagined the enemy's movements, their likely formations, and their intentions. Unlike others, she did not rely on sight. She relied on sound, vibration, instinct, and logic. Each piece of information from the distant hills, the forest edges, and the river bends came together in a map within her mind. She whispered instructions to Kale, who immediately carried them to the commanders below. Each instruction was precise, designed to maximize their advantage while minimizing risk. The Zalvar forces began to appear on the ridge, small groups moving cautiously as they tested the Lumerian defenses. Elira listened closely, feeling the rhythm of their approach. "They are cautious," she said. "They expect resistance, but they underestimate us. Use the terrain. The forest edges will funnel them toward our archers, and the hills can block their scouts' paths." Timing is everything. Lumerian archers, positioned according to Elira's directions, fired volleys into the paths where the Zalvar scouts appeared. The enemy, startled, attempted to reorganize, but Elira had already anticipated their response. "Send the infantry along the left ridge," she instructed. "They will think it is unguarded. Let them run into the traps we set." Soldiers moved swiftly, taking positions that even the enemy could not see, guided by Kale's clear commands and Elira's keen understanding of the terrain. From the towers, Elira listened to the sounds of combat, the clash of shields, the shout of commanders, the skirmishers' hurried movements. She felt the patterns of the fight shift and change, noticing weaknesses in the enemy's formation. "Reposition the archers," she said, "to cover the eastern hill. They are trying to flank from there." Kale relayed the order, and soon the Lumerian forces regained control of the area, turning potential disaster into an advantage. The battle continued through the afternoon. Zalvar troops pressed forward, seeking weaknesses, but Elira predicted their moves before they could act. She guided the soldiers to intercept, redirect, and defend with precision. Kale stayed at her side, offering advice where needed, but always allowing Elira's strategy to take the lead. Together, they created a defense that seemed almost unbreakable, a testament to human ingenuity combined with Lumerian understanding. During a moment of calm between skirmishes, Elira spoke to Kale. "Do you think the king will finally see me as more than a blind princess?" she asked. Kale smiled, his eyes reflecting the light of the afternoon sun. "He already does. But more importantly, so do the people. You are no longer invisible, Elira. You are a leader." Her lips curved in a small smile, and she felt a surge of pride. It was one thing to guide the battle, another to have her mind, her courage, and her judgment recognized. The Zalvar generals, realizing their tactics had failed repeatedly, decided to commit a larger portion of their forces to the eastern approach. Elira listened carefully, discerning their new formation from the subtle cues in the battlefield. The thud of heavy boots on soft ground, the pattern of banners moving in the wind, the distant voices carried faintly by the air. "They are committing the main force to the east," she said. but they are leaving their right flank exposed. If we strike there, we can turn the battle." Cavalry units were redirected to the exposed flank, archers adjusted their aim, and infantry prepared to push forward. The coordination was seamless, and soon the Lumerians were in position to strike where the enemy had least expected. When the attack was executed, the results were immediate. The Zalvar forces, surprised by the coordinated counterstrike, began to falter. Their formations broke, and confusion spread among their ranks. Elira listened to the sounds of disarray, guiding reinforcements where needed, predicting retreats and blocking potential escapes. Every move was calculated, precise, and effective. Kale moved alongside the units, helping relay her directions, inspiring the soldiers, and ensuring the operation flowed smoothly. By evening, the battle had shifted completely in Lumeria's favor. The enemy's morale was broken, and their troops began to retreat in disorganized groups. Elira, sensing the final movements, instructed the archers to cover the retreat routes, preventing the enemy from regrouping and ensuring the kingdom's safety. The soldiers cheered as they saw the results of the coordinated effort, their trust in Elira and Kale's guidance unwavering. After the battle, Elira stood atop the castle walls, listening to the fading footsteps of the retreating enemy. She could feel the relief in the city, the deep exhale of the soldiers, and the quiet celebration that began to ripple through the kingdom. Kale stood beside her, sharing the moment of victory silently, understanding the weight of what they had accomplished together. The king approached her then, stepping onto the balcony where she stood. His eyes were filled with pride and a newfound respect. "You have done the kingdom an extraordinary service," he said. "Not only have you guided us to victory, but you have shown us that wisdom and courage are not limited by sight or by age. I am proud to call you my daughter." Elira bowed her head slightly, humbled by his words. "Thank you, your majesty. I only did what I could to help protect Lumeria. You saved lives, you inspired people to be their best, and you did it all with your mind, your heart, and your courage." Elira felt warmth spread through her chest, a mix of pride and humility. She had once been invisible, ignored by the court, and underestimated by the world. Now she had become a symbol of hope, strategy, and resilience. As the sun set, the kingdom celebrated quietly, marking the end of the battle without extravagance. Elira moved through the castle halls, hearing the whispers of admiration and respect. Soldiers nodded at her, officers saluted, and even nobles who had once dismissed her offered polite recognition. She realized that her voice had gained power not because she had demanded it, but because she had acted, and because Kale had chosen to stand beside her. That night, Elira and Kale walked through the gardens, the stars beginning to glitter in the sky above. The air was calm now, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and earth. Elira's mind wandered over the day's events, the strategies, the victories, the decisions made in the heat of conflict. "Do you think this is over?" she asked softly. Kale shook his head. "Not yet. The enemy will regroup. They will return, perhaps stronger, perhaps more cunning. But today you proved something important. You proved that courage, insight, and partnership can overcome even great odds. And together we can face whatever comes next. Your leadership will be needed again, and perhaps soon." Elira nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility balanced by the clarity of purpose. She knew that the battles ahead would be difficult, but she no longer feared them. She had insight, courage, and a human ally whose belief in her amplified her own strength. As she lay in her chamber that night, Elira reflected on the events of the day. She thought of the soldiers who trusted her, the generals who followed her guidance, and the king who had finally recognized her wisdom. But most of all, she thought of Kale, the human who had seen her potential when no one else did, and who had stood beside her through every decision, every risk, and every challenge. His trust had given her confidence, his respect had given her courage, and his partnership had shown her that even a blind princess could lead a kingdom to victory. Outside the castle walls, the city of Lumeria was quiet now, the threat of the enemy fading into the hills beyond. The people of the kingdom would speak of the day for years to come, not only for the victory achieved, but for the unexpected heroism of a princess once ignored, and a human visitor whose courage and belief had changed everything. Elira, once invisible, had become a guiding light, proving that insight, intelligence, and the willingness to act could shape the destiny of a kingdom. And in that quiet night, as the stars shimmered above and the city rested, Elira understood something profound. True courage was not in fighting alone, nor in being seen by all, but in standing beside someone who believed in your strength and in believing in yourself. With Kale by her side, she knew that no challenge, no enemy, and no uncertainty could dim the light she had discovered within herself. The morning after the battle dawned bright and calm over Lumeria. The city, though weary from the previous day's conflict, was alive with cautious celebration. Soldiers repaired defenses, merchants reopened their stalls, and the citizens began to speak of the courage and ingenuity that had saved their kingdom. Elira stood at the balcony of the castle, listening to the hum of the city below. The winds carried distant echoes of life, laughter, and relief. For the first time in her life, she felt that she belonged fully in her kingdom, not as a shadow, not as a hidden presence, but as someone whose mind and courage mattered. Kale joined her at the balcony, the sun catching the light in his eyes. "The city is alive again," he said, his voice calm and observant. "The people trust you now, Elira. They know you have guided them through darkness." Elira nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on her shoulders. She had grown stronger over the past days, not just in confidence but in understanding. Leadership was not simply giving orders. It was knowing when to act, when to listen, and when to trust others. Kale had taught her that trust could transform the ordinary into extraordinary, and she now understood it firsthand. The king approached, his steps careful but deliberate. He paused beside them, looking out at the city with eyes that reflected pride and reflection. "You have done more than I could have imagined," he said softly. "You have guided soldiers, advised generals, and saved lives. I was wrong to underestimate you, Elira. The kingdom owes you more than thanks." Elira's lips curved into a gentle smile. "I only acted as I could, Your Majesty. The kingdom's safety has always been my priority." Kale, standing beside her, placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You did more than act," he said quietly. "You led, you inspired. You showed that courage, intellect, and belief in others can overcome any challenge." The generals who had once doubted her now sought her insight, understanding that her perception and guidance had been key to the kingdom's defense. Even the youngest soldiers spoke her name with admiration, inspired by her courage and her ability to see what others could not. Elira, however, remained humble, knowing that the victory was the result of trust, partnership, and collaboration, not just her abilities alone. Kale continued to stay at her side, not as a protector, but as an equal, a partner in every decision and action. Together, they walked through the castle, visiting the soldiers, listening to the citizens, and observing the restoration of the city. Everywhere they went, whispers of admiration followed them, and Elira realized that her journey from invisibility to recognition had inspired hope. People no longer saw a blind princess. They saw a leader who could act, think, and guide with clarity and wisdom. One afternoon, as they walked through the castle gardens, Elira reflected on the days of preparation, uncertainty, and battle. "I never imagined my life could be like this," she said softly. "I thought my blindness would always keep me apart, hidden and unheard, yet now I feel as though I am part of everything." Kale smiled, his gaze steady. "Your blindness did not limit you," he said. "It made you see differently. It taught you to notice what others overlooked, to understand the world through patterns, sounds, and intuition. You were never weak. You were waiting for someone to recognize your strength. I am proud to have been beside you." Each person who had followed her guidance had contributed to the victory, and each had learned something about courage and trust. She understood now that leadership was not about asserting power over others, but about guiding them, inspiring them, and helping them discover their own potential. The kingdom had faced fear, uncertainty, and a formidable enemy, and together they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. That evening, the castle held a gathering to honor the victory. Soldiers, advisors, nobles, and citizens crowded the great hall. The king addressed the assembly, his voice echoing through the marble chambers. "Today, we celebrate not only our survival, but the courage and ingenuity that made it possible. We honor the wisdom and leadership of Princess Elira, whose guidance has proven that true strength lies not in sight alone, but in understanding, courage, and action. This victory belongs to everyone who stood together," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The soldiers, the generals, the citizens, and those who believed in what seemed impossible, all of you made this possible. I only offered guidance, but it was your courage, your actions, and your trust that protected Lumeria." The hall erupted in applause, not only for her words, but for the recognition that courage, wisdom, and collaboration could overcome even the most difficult odds. Kale stood quietly beside her, observing the reaction with pride. He had seen her grow from an overlooked, isolated princess into a leader who inspired respect, trust, and admiration. Elira's mind had sharpened, her courage strengthened, and her understanding of the world deepened. Together, they had shown that even in the face of fear, humanity and intelligence could triumph. After the gathering, the king approached Elira in private, his expression softened by humility. "You have proven that strength is more than power, more than sight, and more than titles," he said. "You have earned your place not only as my daughter, but as a guiding force in this kingdom. The people will follow you, and I will trust your judgment in the days ahead." Elira bowed her head, feeling the weight of responsibility and honor equally. "I will do my best to serve the kingdom, your majesty," she said. "And I will not forget the lessons I have learned, the importance of trust, courage, and believing in those around me." Her insight proved invaluable, and Kale continued to act as both mentor and partner, guiding her through unfamiliar customs and sharing knowledge from his own experiences. The people of the kingdom, inspired by her example, began to embrace a new perspective, that everyone, no matter how overlooked, had strengths and potential worth recognizing. Elira also began to think beyond the castle and the city. She imagined exploring the forests, rivers, and distant towns of Lumeria, meeting its citizens and understanding their needs. She had been isolated for so long, yet now she realized that the world was full of opportunities to learn, teach, and lead. With Kale by her side, she knew that no challenge would be insurmountable. One evening, as they walked along the palace walls, Elira spoke quietly. "I never imagined that someone could see me for who I truly am," she said, her voice soft. "For so long I was ignored, dismissed, and underestimated, but now I feel seen, I feel understood, and I know that I can make a difference." Kale looked at her, his expression calm and steady. "You always had the strength," he said. "I only helped you discover it. You have shown the kingdom that courage, intelligence, and compassion can shape destiny. That is something no one can take away from you." She understood that leadership was a journey, not a title, and that true strength came from empathy, insight, and the willingness to act despite fear. Kale's belief in her had unlocked a confidence she had never known, and together they had inspired a kingdom to embrace courage, trust, and ingenuity. As night fell over Lumeria, Elira looked out at the stars twinkling above the castle. She imagined the vast world beyond, full of unknown challenges, opportunities, and discoveries. Yet for the first time, she did not feel fear. She felt readiness. She had insight, courage, allies, and a human friend whose trust and guidance had taught her the power of partnership. Elira understood that being seen, being trusted, and being allowed to act could change everything. The days that followed were filled with rebuilding, teaching, and strengthening the kingdom. Soldiers trained under Elira's guidance, new strategies were implemented to protect Lumeria's borders, and citizens began to feel safer, inspired by the example of a princess who had been ignored, yet had led them to victory. Kale continued to stay with her, not as an outsider, but as a partner in leadership, a constant reminder that humanity, empathy, and courage could unlock potential where it was least expected. In time, Elira became known not only as a princess, but as a symbol of hope, intelligence, and courage. People traveled from distant lands to seek her counsel, soldiers trusted her judgment, and nobles sought her guidance in matters of governance. The kingdom thrived, strengthened by the lessons learned during the crisis, that no one should be underestimated, that trust can amplify strength, and that true courage comes not from fearlessness, but from acting despite fear. One evening, Kale and Elira stood together on the highest tower, overlooking the city they had saved and helped transform. The stars sparkled above, and the streets below hummed with life. "Do you think the world will always recognize the strength in those who are overlooked?" Elira asked softly. Kale shook his head, smiling. "Not always, but what matters is that someone stands beside them. And today you have shown that the world can change when courage, intelligence, and partnership meet." Elira nodded, feeling the truth in his words. With a quiet determination, she knew that whatever challenges the future held, she would face them with insight, courage, and the support of those who believed in her. The princess who had once been ignored, the girl who had navigated life in darkness, had become a leader, an inspiration, and a symbol of hope for Lumeria and beyond. And at her side, Kale reminded her that humanity, in all its courage and ingenuity, could empower even the most overlooked individuals to achieve greatness. As the night deepened and the city settled into a peaceful quiet, Elira closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm of the kingdom beneath her feet, the pulse of life around her, and the steady presence of Kale beside her. She had learned that vision came in many forms, that courage was a choice, and that true strength was often discovered when someone chose to believe in you. The kingdom was safe, the people inspired, and the future full of possibility. Elira smiled softly, ready to lead, ready to guide, and ready to face whatever came next. For Elira, the princess who had been ignored, the journey had not ended. It had only begun. And with Kale standing beside her, she knew that together they could face anything, inspire everyone, and change the world.